Yvonne, we've been hearing from people we've got at Rafah and in Egypt on both sides of the border there that there don't appear to be any Australians among those being allowed out of Gaza today. It looks more like American and European passport holders are being prioritised today. Australians appear to have been among the first groups allowed to exit Gaza yesterday. There was a preliminary list that was approved, that was circulated, and a number of Australians, we found out 20 Australian citizens and 3 other people registered with the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade were able to leave. It's possible there are still more than 60 Australians stuck in Gaza, confirmed to be in Gaza, with no way to exit, and that includes some people who were on that list yesterday and couldn't make it to Rafah, and others who had administrative problems when they got to Rafah, for example, not being able to bring family members out with them, despite their expectation that they would be able to do that. So the government doesn't know when those people will be able to get out of Gaza and when the crossing's going to open for them again. They say it's a changing situation all the time, and they're trying to keep people as best informed as they can.
Meanwhile, Eric, Israel says it has killed another Hamas militant in its second strike in Jabalia. What about the civilian casualties and the damage that has been done to infrastructure there? Can you describe for us the situation?
So Jabalia it's called a refugee camp, but it's not. It's a heavily built up area. It's a refugee camp because that's how it was founded in the late 1940s, with people who were displaced during the conflict between Israel and the Arab nations. So now it's this very densely populated part it's an outer suburb of Gaza City, with more than 110,000 people registered living there, many of them families. So in a briefing yesterday, the Israeli military told us that they'd identified a Hamas command post underneath some of those buildings, some of those residential apartments, and that there was a ground assault and an airstrike in support of that. And they say some of the damage you can see is the result of underground Hamas infrastructure collapsing, and that's why there's such a large hole in the ground. And that is actually consistent with some other occasions in which Israel has damaged buildings in Gaza and there's been a subsequent collapse. I'm not saying that's necessarily the case here. That's what Israel is saying, and that's what people who've covered previous conflicts have also said. Then the second strike, Israel, it initially said that to one media outlet that yes, it was responsible for the strike. Then it's told others that it's investigating, and in our briefing yesterday we were told that Israel was going to investigate further. It said the reason for striking such a densely populated area was that it believes there's a very senior commander of Hamas, Ibrahim Bahari, who was the head of the Jabalia brigade of Hamas's Al-Qassam military wing. And he said that Ibrahim Bahari was involved in planning and conduct of the October 7 terrorist attacks in communities outside the Gaza border. That's why they considered him a high-value target, and they're arguing that's why it was justified to strike such a densely crowded area. Also saying that they had given civilians many warnings to leave, and that they're having to balance these considerations when attacking Hamas infrastructure around Gaza City. So Jabalia has been struck twice. It's devastating for the residents there. You've seen the scale of the damage in the footage. Hospitals have described having hundreds of wounded people, and the number of dead is still being confirmed from those 2 strikes. But that's the question that is always facing both Israel and the international community that's trying to assess its conduct. What is the question of proportionality, and whether or not these strikes to take out Hamas leaders, as Israel says, are justified in the context of the very high civilian death toll.
Well, Israel has also revised up the number of hostages it believes Hamas is detaining. What has been said?
Well, Israel says there's now 242 people. It's notified the families of 242 people it believes are being held by Hamas in Gaza. The number just keeps going up. That's because there were also foreign nationals seized by Hamas and other militant groups when they raided Israeli communities on October the 7th. And I think that they're still working out in those communities. There's still forensic investigations underway to determine who had actually died, and they're still revising those numbers and notifying families of those things as well, that their loved ones' remains have been identified. So it's a difficult process. That's why the numbers keep changing. We also know now that I think up to 17 Israeli soldiers have been killed in this ground offensive, which is, you know, the casualty count is starting to mount for Israel. They've already lost more than 300 soldiers in the attack on October the 7th. And as they push closer into the heavily urbanised areas of Gaza City, that's going to be another consideration. Of course, coupled with the concern, Yvonne, in Israel that they don't know the status of all the all the hostages. Hamas says a number have been killed in Israeli airstrikes, and there's fear amongst the families of the hostages and their supporters that as Israel's ground offensive intensifies, the hostages will be in even greater risk.
Well, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken is expected to visit Israel and Jordan tomorrow. What can we expect from his trip?
This is really an urgent trip from the Secretary of State because Arab countries are very, very concerned about unrest within their populations, and anger at Israel over its campaign in Gaza. Jordan recalled its ambassador yesterday and is not allowing the Israeli ambassador to return to Amman, the capital, after he left during protests a couple of weeks ago. That is a huge step for Jordan, which is really one of Israel's closest cooperative partners in this region. They work together on so many things, but most notably on security. So that's a very serious diplomatic step for a neighbouring country to take. And the US is extremely worried about the risks of regional conflict escalating. It needs the countries around Israel on side. It needs Jordan on side. It needs Egypt particularly on side. And Egypt's making louder and louder noises about its concern, its discomfort with the situation in Gaza. And of course that's related to, you know, the popular feeling, the popular sentiment around the Arab world, but also the simple security risks as there are attacks coming from Israel. From Yemen against Israel. There's actions by Hezbollah in the southern part of Lebanon across Israel's northern border. So these are really serious concerns about a spiralling regional conflict. And that's why Antony Blinken is coming. That's why he's trying to reassure leaders in the Arab world and around the Middle East that the US is talking to Israel, is asking Israel to act responsibly and in accordance with international law to allow aid to come into Gaza. This is really an urgent attempt by the US government to shore up weakening support around the region.
Eric Tlozek in Ashdod, thanks for the update.